Warning, the following video has flashing lights and also includes content that may be deemed inappropriate for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Lyle Blackburn from Monstro, Bizarro. Yes, finally, you have managed to find your way into the darkness of the fox den and awaken me from my slumber, as once again it is time for me to arise and get ready to feast. Absolutely delicious, and I do appreciate you, Mr. Blackburn, bringing me nutrients, also releasing me from my shackles and allowing me to revamp myself and completely power up. Now, without further ado, it is time for Lyle Blackburn and LordeStarfox to take a walk into the madness.
Stood up. I said, oh my god, it's a werewolf, and everybody in the car freaked out.
My creatures of the night. Yes, once again, it is midnight lycanthropy time here on LordeStarfox Radio. I would like to think I'm always trying to bring the best possible content for the audience. Yet, well, I have somebody here finally that is a legend in my eyes. Huge fan of him for years. Of course, I am referring to Monster Bizarro. Wait, you don't recognize that? Well, you must recognize Lyle Blackburn. How you doing tonight, man?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, it's great to finally sit down and link up with you, my friend.
Always busy with monsters or music and cryptid research, so, life is never dull.
Yes, I can imagine that. To the audience, I encourage you to check out Lyle everywhere. His link's going to be in the description of the video. He's going to be up on the good old suggestion under the Midnight Society. Check out his stuff. Tonight, we're going to be talking about some pretty legendary stuff. Yet before we dive into these gnarly 2 Texas encounters, I would like to know what got you interested in cryptids per se. What kind of pushed you more in the direction of the Dogman and werewolves and such?
Well, it's an interest I've had my whole life, really. Once I realized there were things like Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster and the Yeti, from as far back as I can remember, I loved movie monsters. I loved everything spooky, and, I read old famous monsters magazines. And then at some point I got a book called Strange But True in elementary school, and it had stories of Bigfoot. And that was the first I had heard of it. Of course, this is before the internet and mostly before television shows on that. And, I was just enthralled. And I grew up, I was born in Fort Worth, Texas, so been a Texan all my life. My father's an avid hunter. We did a lot of bow hunting and stuff. So ever since I was young, we were in the woods. And when I sort of realized there could be creatures out there that were, monstrous and unknown to science, I was just enthralled. And then I eventually saw an old movie called The Legend of Boggy Creek in a drive-in. And that's where that fascination really came together, because rather than Bigfoot, being reported so far away in the Pacific Northwest, this creature was said to live in the Sulphur River bottoms of southern Arkansas. And that was about 3 hours from where I lived in Texas. So, everything kind of came together for me. And then just fast forward after years, I've been a musician most of my life, and I did a lot of writing on the side, but I wanted to write a book, and I thought, what is my favorite subject? What fascinates me the most that I would want to learn about, in a nonfiction sort of way? And I thought, Legend of Boggy Creek. What was true about that site? What was true about the sightings that the movie was based on, and how was that movie made? It was a big deal before there was the internet and before there were all these television shows like Monster Quest and everything else. That's what you had. You had these sort of different documentaries like Mysterious Monsters and Legend of Boggy Creek, and of course the Patterson-Gimlin film to kind of reel you in. So, I've been fascinated with all manner of cryptids, and of course, being sort of a guy who likes all the spookiest stuff, all through time, I've been interested in werewolves, and then as the Dogman phenomenon and more of these reports have come out, of course, they're just as fascinating and sometimes more terrifying than others. That's what I do, and so I write books and do research, and I still go in the woods, and occasionally I get on a TV show and try to impart what what I know about the subject, and it's all good times.
Beautiful stuff right there. I wouldn't expect anything else. I have two quick questions for you before we head down to the Dogman Triangle, yes, or the Texas Triangle. I'm down with Small Town Monsters, good buddies with Aaron Deese and Heather Moser. Before we head down there, have you ever had any sort of paranormal or cryptid encounters? And then my next question would be, from what I understand with the Boggy Creek aspect, from some of the things I've come over in passing, we have a ton of Dogman sightings down in this area, and Dogman have been seen swimming.
Well, as far as Boggy Creek, I mean, I've interviewed the most witnesses and covered about 100 different sightings. They're all described as primarily as just a 7-foot tall, upright, ape-like creature. Very much Southern Bigfoot. I mean, all the way. The tracks that have been found, there's been various ones from 3-toed prints to 4-toed to 5-toe, but they're all, Bigfoot-like, not canid at all. And if you're referring to the incident from 1971 where the Ford family reported numerous activity around their house, the hand that came in the window was, they said it didn't have claws. It wasn't a bear. It looked hairy, but like a large human, I guess. They weren't real descriptive because all you had in those times was the newspaper accounts. There was only one witness told me that this was around 2006. This was a wildlife photographer whom I've gotten to know, and she is a very credible witness, was driving down an area near Long Slough where I actually had an encounter, and this was some years before mine, that she said she saw it come up, run across the road. It looked to her like a Bigfoot, but she said that it looked like it had an elongated snout or something was in its mouth. That was the only time where somebody described something like that. A lot of the old encounters would just use the term wild man or say it looked like not a feral human, but more, they didn't use the term Bigfoot because in the South there was no such thing back at a time in the 50s and 60s. They didn't know what Bigfoot was. Now, while there's been Dogman sightings in Arkansas and, of course, around Texas, I see the difference in when people describe those and what was described in Boggy Creek. So I would say 100% that is a Southern Sasquatch and fits right in with multitude of the others, because I wrote a book called Beyond Boggy Creek, which delves into the whole history of Bigfoot sightings in the Deep South. So it aligns well with those. Now, the second part of the question is, what paranormal experiences have I had? And like I said, my jump-off point was not because I had an encounter, where that sometimes is people's launch point into this. I was the opposite of being fascinated. But I've, been hunting and an outdoorsman, and all my life, and as well spent a lot of time researching. When I do a book, if I'm doing Boggy Creek or Momo the Missouri Monster, whatever, I like to go to the area, I interview people, and I go into the woods and the places where people said it's been seen. Over the years, there's been things like something stalking at us, something howling at us. I chased something through the woods that was very big and was outrunning me. Wasn't a deer, wasn't a bear. I've come up within very close to bears in the wild and other things. But the best cryptid sighting was in the Boggy Creek area. I was with two other researchers, and we had been looking along this very murky lake area. It's very swampy down there, the Sulphur River bottoms. Somebody had told me that they had seen a pile of bones, like discarded bones that included hogs and deer. Now, that's kind of weird because people will shoot wild hogs down there. I mean, they're rampant, and they will throw them. But deer, typically people do not shoot deer and then throw them in a bone pile. So, I'm thinking, okay, this is the creature. And we had hiked in the late afternoon along this swampy lake, and further back than I've ever really gone on foot. And then when you kind of get to the backside of that lake, it starts to get back towards the Sulphur River, where it is very remote. There's nobody that lives out there. It is still the same as it was back in, the 70s when the Boggy Creek reports were first coming to light in the public. We're down in there, and my two associates are kind of about 20 yards behind me, and we had been hiking through all this mucky area. I mean, there's cottonmouths in there. It's hard to travel. We had yet to see these bones that they had described, and perhaps the water had risen and covered them. And I saw a game trail that was just kind of clear, and I thought, I'm just going to walk up this just simply because it looks easy. I'd hike through the muck. As I did, I was not thinking about anything, just exploring the woods, and I hear what sounded like footsteps, and I turn to my right. I see what first looks like a leg or something dark come out of some brush between some trees about maybe 30 yards away. It wasn't very far. And within the next second, I see more of it, and I thought, there's a big black hog. Well, then immediately I see a full upright figure walk right out between some thick trees into an open area and walk across on two legs upright. And as my mind is, analyzing it, it's just like, it's not a person. They're not wearing clothes. It was just very dark, very black. The fur or the hair, whatever it was pretty uniformly dark. And it walked, and I could see it for maybe 3 to 4 seconds before it went behind some other trees and went out of view. Now, I don't think it ever saw me because I was moving very quietly. I always move quiet in the woods when I can, and I was walking up this clear trail. So at that point, I had two choices. I was like, either I'm going to run after this thing because I want to see it. I want to see it again and see more of it, even at my own peril, or do I tell my buddies back here, because I thought, well, if they see it too, that's even better. It corroborates my sighting. I opted for the second option, which usually I would just go right after it. But I thought, well, I'm going to tell them. So I kind of went down the trail and tried to quickly tell them that I had seen something. And in that time, of course, there's noise being made, and I'm trying to be quiet, but they're like, what? I'm like, shh, I just saw something. And finally, they kind of tune in. And, you could feel the chill, because back in there, it looks like something out of a horror movie. That landscape, and it's very, very dark, and it was getting late in the evening. So we sort of methodically start moving down, thinking, well, it couldn't have gone far. We're going to, run it out of the brush here, and it'll run in some direction, and we'll see it again. Well, we went in the direction where I thought it had gone, up in the trees, walked around in different directions, and we never could find it or flush it out. And so all I can presume is, in the time it took me to tell them what was going on, that I'm sure it heard us, zipped off in some direction unknown. we looked around for prints, but there was some leaf litter, and right around where I saw it, and then I wasn't sure which direction it went, but we didn't see any more prints. Your adrenaline's pumping, and I'm, like, man, you just want to replay that moment. You want a better opportunity, but at least I had enough time to view it to where I was certain it wasn't a person, and it was certainly upright and just basically fit the description of what so many people had told me over the years, what they had seen down in that very area. So that was the best cryptid sighting. And when I was younger, I actually saw a ghost at a friend's house. Love all these subjects, so that was a cool experience. And there's been other things, ghostly sort of stuff. But as far as cryptids, that was the best and the greatest sighting I've had.
Beautiful stuff right there. Thank you for clarifying that. As a journalist, I do always ask myself why certain little details are either left out, meaning in older encounters, do some of these reporters just assume that when they say an area like North Carolina and dogs were being attacked, that it's the 50s? How many types of dogs do people have? So they don't tell you the size because they assume everyone knows it's like a tick count or such, which assumptions aren't good. Same thing with here. You have what you described, which I definitely believe you over other reports and things I've heard about, yet seems pretty cut and dry. It looked more humanish. But then, like I said, you have other people saying it was like a clawed hand trying to pull her out, and then something pretty much tried to grab the gentleman outside and pull him off, and then he ended up running through the screen door. Very bizarre stuff, yet awesome. I appreciate you clearing that up. Yet let's get a little bit more creepy to the audience. The Converse werewolf is something that I feel is pretty slept on, meaning it's not covered the most. I had never heard of it until I had heard you speak about it on your podcast before. I would love to hear you recreate what you've heard over the years with this encounter. Then after we toss the mic around for a few, we're going to hit up the Thibodeau brothers down in Lake Tacoma to wrap up the episode. So we got some pretty interesting stuff for the audience. I'm going to give Mr. Blackburn the mic and let him nerd out with us here with some great information.
Okay, yeah, the Converse werewolf is one of my favorite stories, and one that dates back so many years that sort of bridges the gap between, I guess, the old world werewolf and modern day Dogman or cryptid style that we research. Unfortunately, there is no documented source for the Converse werewolf story. This is something that is sort of in Texas folklore a bit, a story that's been passed down word of mouth and referenced, in various older books, but not, there's no way to trace it back to, nobody interviewed the guy or anything. And it dates back to the late 1800s. Converse is located close to San Antonio, about 5 hours south of Fort Worth where I live. And I've been to San Antonio many times, home of the Alamo and things like that. And there's a multitude of bizarre cryptid sightings that's come out of that southwest area of Texas. And the Converse werewolf story, the way it goes is that there was a man who owned a ranch down near Converse. He was an avid hunter, just a manly man, and his son, wasn't taking to hunting, and the father felt like he needed to kind of toughen up, and so they had purchased this ranch out there, and he told the son, he said, you need to go out and do some hunting. He said, here's a rifle, go out and there's plenty of deer. There's a lot of deer. I've even hunted down there. There's a lot of deer in that area, so it's a perfect place to go deer hunting. So the boy goes out, and he stays out for a while, and it's kind of gets spooked out. He's down in these deserted area. There's creek bottoms and some sparse thickets, and he's kind of freaked out. So he comes back to the house, and the father's like, Okay, well, where, what happened? There's plenty of deer. Didn't you shoot one? No, I just got, kind of scared. So he said, okay, you go back out there and, you're going to hunt and you're going to learn this. So this is the way we're going to do it. And he said, go out and don't come back till you, bag a buck. And so the kid's like, oh, okay. So the father, was kind of trying to teach him tough love, I guess. And so this kid goes back out and he's gone for quite a while. And now it's starting to get dark. And the father kind of regretting being so harsh on the boy. And by the time it was completely dark, he was truly worried. I mean, he knew his kid wasn't very experienced at the hunting or in the woods. So he organized a few of the neighbors, whatever guys that were nearby, and they went out in search of the boy. And after some period of time, they came down to an old creek called Skull Creek, appropriately. And at that point, they had lantern lights, and they came across the body of this boy, and he was laid out, and he was deceased, and there was this hairy creature over the body. And when the creature, caught sight of the men, it stood up, and it was described as being this, canid, bipedal canid type thing. In other words, a werewolf. And the men were just as freaked out, and the thing ran off into the woods. The father, to follow up, I guess the father felt so bad about this that he sort of became a hermit. There's a few versions of the story. Essentially, this, if it's true, is one of the earliest stories of a, quote unquote, what we would call a dogman, especially in Texas. Now, at the time, there's very old legends in Louisiana, which is our neighbor to the east, especially in the southern Cajun culture, which is the French that had populated their area. So the Cajuns are basically descendants of the French, and they had many stories of the loup-garou that had come across from Europe, and that sort of transformed into something called the rougarou, which was basically a werewolf type creature. And it was, in the culture, it's kind of used as a boogeyman, but you did have people who would claim that these are real and they had seen them, and essentially were werewolves. But when you get to Texas, you don't have that sort of cultural basis for a werewolf creature, but you do have things like the Converse werewolf. And then even fast forward, there's some famous ones like the Viter werewolf from the 70s. We do have some notable cases that kind of date back many years, and these were things that were being reported long before there was a term dogman, or before, cryptozoologists and paranormal researchers sort of zeroed in on this. Okay, we've got this profile of this, upright bipedal canid. So those are very interesting stories, and certainly the Converse werewolf is like, you could make a mini movie out of that thing. It's so spooky and cool. But I've been down there to Converse and looked in the area. So that kind of brings a perspective to this, being able even just to go there. Obviously, this happened or didn't happen so many years ago, but yeah, that's one of the oldest werewolf type stories that we have.
Beautiful stuff right there. Terrifying for sure. Couple of interesting things to stir the pot. I do know recently Bobby Businger, who was one of the more old school encounters that happened down in Medora, Texas, came out and spoke about more or less how it was some psychotic individual that had some sort of issue where he couldn't feel pain. He was like banging all on the side of his cabin. Another little bit of interesting information is the Blackfoot had a really hard time translating the loup-garou, which is how it turned into the rougarou, because they couldn't say the beginning L part. Pretty cool stuff.
Right, yeah. It's interesting how it kind of went from loup-garou to rougarou, as languages do. But interesting but still describing basically the same creature, just the same as we might describe it as a dogman.
100%. It's like that gentleman that accidentally mistranslated the indigenous culture with Sasquatch, and he called it the Sasquatch. It's pretty close still, obviously, same being they're referring to.
Right, because Sasquatch is, yeah, it's a sort of amalgamation of Native American term there. It's, yeah, you're right. It's not actually, that wasn't the actual term. It was just sort of translated that way, and then it just stuck because it seems perfect.
Right? It's so cool. Just my brain's like a sponge, so I enjoy seeping in any sort of quality knowledge. Sometimes it comes to play where I get to speak about it like right now. Other times it just sits up in the file cabinet upstairs for who knows how long before it comes to surface. Where do you sit with this? Do you yourself personally think this occurred? Do you think it could have just been something that really did happen, but you know how it is, the fish game? Or do you just think this might be a tale that was told to keep people on their toes?
Well, yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, we can't put just a whole lot of stock in it as being fact because it is so much, it fits so much into folklore. And when you don't have any source, like not even a newspaper article or, you know, we don't have the name of the rancher or any of that. There's no way to know, but I mean, we can kind of say, well, it's possible because if we have modern encounters of something very similar in the same region, then obviously they could have been there back in the 1800s. And, you know, it seems odd for me if somebody's going to make up a tale, why they would choose a werewolf. Texas just isn't a place where stories like that would seem like the right setting. So I don't know. It just seems like the fact that it's described as this sort of werewolf thing gives it more credence to me because it's a very random thing to be making up and associated with Texas. Now, had this been something in Louisiana, you would definitely say, well, this could easily be something that somebody made up to tell their kid because werewolves were a part of the culture, but in Texas they were not. And I mean, I grew up here and so forth. So I think the fact that it was described as a werewolf kind of makes you think, well, you know, that could very well have been it. And the story was so spooky and scary and interesting that it somehow got preserved through several families. That's how it stuck around. But ultimately we'll never know, but it's definitely a cool story.
Nightmare fuel for sure. Like you said, though, unfortunately, it's just from that time frame where it's pretty hard to verify it now. Important not to overlook it, but also it's not something that if I had to sit down with a huge presentation of scientific people I want to work with, that probably wouldn't be my first one I presented.
Right, absolutely not. It wouldn't stand up to the scrutiny of science whatsoever. But you know, I mean, it's good to establish what we can of older sightings. In newspapers of the 1800s, there's a lot of articles about what would be called wild men, but they were mostly described as being these hair-covered huge things that left huge footprints. I mean, it's like, okay, that sounds like a Bigfoot. But even with an old newspaper report, you know, you kind of can't use that as the ultimate proof because we don't know this. What that reporter, maybe he was bored that week and made this up, or did he really interview somebody who saw something that they didn't have a word for, you know, and they applied Bigfoot, or heck, it could have been a dogman and they just called it a wild man because, again, they don't know these terms, you know, didn't come into play until, you know, 50 years ago. So yeah, all those stories we got to take with a grain of salt, but they're definitely interesting, and you want to try to dig into the history and try to establish that perhaps people have been seeing these all along, because if they're here now, in my opinion. They would have been here all along.
Excellent stuff again, my guy. Preach. Couldn't agree more with all of that. All right, to the audience, do you think that first one was gnarly? I don't think this one can top it per se, yet you do have 3 people involved. 2 of them spoke. The third person has never spoke. Interesting. He could have not spoke because of what happened, or he could also not have spoke because maybe he thought things unfolded differently than the 2 Thibodeau brothers. I have no answers for any of that. I just know it was only the Thibodeau brothers that spoke about this. One of the first times I chatted with Lyle, I actually spoke to him about this. And while he was down in the Texas area, I do remember you saying you ran into somebody that had actually heard of this encounter. You have 3 friends, including 2 brothers, that have decided for the evening, yes, they would like to go fishing out on Lake Texacoma down in Texas. They have a boat that has an issue with some wiring. No biggie. You would think, I guess, after that happening for so long, you might want to change your battery wires on your light of your boat. Either way, though, they head out. They go to an area that they claim is good fishing. They pull up on shore. They are sitting there fishing. One of the brothers then claims he starts to hear some very loud rustling, and the other brother then says he has an uneasy feeling. They're sitting here now thinking maybe, hey, I've had a couple too many to drink or something at this point in time. This is another thing. I mean, alcohol is involved here. I do not know what the limit was of what they consumed. Again, I'm just a journalist. It's just a detail that I'm pointing out. They go back to fishing. Well, they then think something's getting closer. His brother also then begins to think he has seen either the same creature or another one. Well, they then ask their buddy on the boat, hey, can you flip the light on? Tries to kick the light on, gets the light on. They don't see anything. Light goes out. They then hear movement coming towards them. Ruh-roh. Boom, light goes back on. They don't see anything. Light goes off again. Something comes closer, trying to get the light on. They're screaming at them, get the light on, get the light on. They see numerous of these creatures now coming towards them. But guess what? The light goes out again. They're sitting there, finally getting the light on. They all run. They get into the boat. They start to take off. They claim they see one of them wade into the water while the other one is standing on shore. After this day, apparently their friend never spoke to them again. Don't know if it was trauma-based. Like I said, don't know if they maybe have different opinions as to what occurred. All I know is I've heard both of the Thibodeau brothers speak. What do you think about all that, my guy?
Well, Lake Texoma is a place that I've been several times. That's not too far from me, and I even have a friend who lives in that county up there. So I know the area well, and this is just one of those reports that seems to fit in with other sightings here in Texas and even Oklahoma. That lake's partially in Oklahoma. It fits well with the others. One thing about this that I find most interesting, or whether it's a credit to the story or a discredit, is that apparently they heard a sort of a breaking sound as this creature appeared, as if it was bones cracking or something, which is a detail that's, if we consider the Dogman as sort of just an entity on its own, this isn't a person who transformed into a wolf-like creature, as in a la werewolf movies. What they describe here kind of implies that, I suppose, which is both scary and mind-boggling. Regardless of that, the whole story here of these seeing the creature and the light going on and off, and then now there's 2 creatures and they're coming towards the boat. Pretty scary stuff. And interestingly enough, when you had first talked to me about this sighting, and That's when I heard of it. And then I was randomly up in East Texas hanging out, and I met up with Scott from Squatch America, and he travels around, Scott Pilate, and he travels around. That's just what he does, and just does some Bigfoot research and just enjoys the outdoors. But I don't know, you got to talk, and he just mentioned he had ran into a couple of guys up around Lake Texoma that had told him they had a Dogman encounter. I was like, no way, dude. I was just talking to about this very case. So it was interesting just how small of a circle these things are and how these stories circulate. But I don't know that he said the guy sounded credible. So I mean, I haven't personally spoken to him. I mean, that gives it a little more credence because these are real people and they've been seen. It's not just somebody posting a story on the internet and no one ever sees them again or even knows their real name. So these are real people that claim to have had this sighting, and I guess their friend Danny or whatever. And you're right, when people, it could go either way. When they don't want to talk about it, you could say, well, they don't want the notoriety. They don't want to be associated with a werewolf story, or they're just flat out traumatized, which you probably would be given the story, or or is his story different? You can never know. And too bad he hasn't spoken, because that would be three people to corroborate the story. But either way, definitely one of the scariest ones I've ever heard as far as some of these Dogman, and certainly as far as Texas Dogman stories, very scary.
Yikes. Yes, it is. That is some straight up nightmare fuel for sure. Numerous witnesses, like you said. Obviously, it'd be great to have 3 instead of 2. Pretty bizarre stuff. Is there anything else tonight, my guy, down in Texas or in general, you would like to touch base on, or do you have any extra thoughts with the conversation we have spoken about in the encounters?
I've had a few friends over the years that have either talked to people who have had what we would describe as Dogman sightings, and even a few people I've interviewed that have had sightings in Texas. So, being associated with small town monsters and getting to know Aaron Dees, who kind of put all this together and dug up all the possible sightings that we have here in Texas, I was really surprised at how many there really were. I mean, I knew bits and pieces, but the more you delve into this and the more you sort of tune in, really you just begin to find more and more. And for me, when I travel around, or if I'm going to write a book and I go to the area, what I always find is that when you begin to talk to locals in the area, and if they believe you're sincere and you're not there to make fun of them or whatever, you will almost always begin to uncover other stories that have never been told. Sightings that are not on the record, because obviously people, especially some years back, weren't just running to the newspapers or getting on the internet to announce to everyone that they had seen some, unidentified mysterious monster. I think all of this, operates the same way. And if you never know, if I go to Lake Texoma next time and begin to talk to people, who knows, I might come up with another sighting that sort of adds to the database of what's been seen there, and we sort of slowly piece these things together over time, doing our best to trace it back to the witnesses, just like you've done with trying to get a hold of the Thibodeau brothers. I mean, they may have told the story, but they didn't tell it to you, and you would be able to ask those follow-up questions. So what you're doing is very good work, and at the very least, just being able to publicize these type things and to just share what people have seen. We can't currently prove it one way or another, but lack of proof doesn't mean that it's not a valid pursuit to research the unknown, and especially the things that interest us. So it's all good stuff, and I'm going to keep my eyes and pointed ears open over here in Texas, and if I dig up some more sightings, I'll definitely share those with you and your listeners.
Again, beautiful stuff. Appreciate you so much, my friend. Before we let you go, would you like to tell the audience where they can catch you and get a hold of you?
The best way to find out more about me is to visit my website at lyleblackburn.com, and that's got links to various things that I've done, all my books on there. I've been involved in 10 films, documentary films with small town monsters. My books are available from my website on my web store, which there's a link at lyleblackburn.com, but you can also get my books on Amazon. If you just search my name on there, they'll come up. Yeah, just visit lyleblackburn.com, and it's got all the jumps to all the information.
Heard that to the audience. I expect you to be paying attention to the great legendary things Mr. Blackburn will be achieving. Yet for the moment, we do need to allow Lyle to get back to other things he needs to attend to. Thanks for hanging out tonight, man. I appreciate you and your time.
Absolutely. Enjoyed it.
Ooh, my creatures of the night, you legends, you, I do adore every single one of you. And thank you for hanging out tonight. Please like, comment, subscribe, share the truth to the algorithm. And remember, there are things that go bump in the night.